Hey guys, it's me, EODGamer here, and what if you could only choose one of Kafka and Blackswan? Which is the better investment? Which one should you pick up first? Let's talk about it in this video as well. Now, first things first, we are always going to be very unbiased with these better investment videos that we do on our channel. And if you care about my personal bias and opinion, I'll leave it right at the end because not many people might care too much about personal bias. Now, first things first. Let's talk about current value. What can these two very good DOT characters offer your account right now? Whenever we talk about spending our premium currency, we want to know if we are getting these units, what benefit can we get straight away? Can they be used more in other team compositions other than DOT? That is the main critical thing between both of them. Between the two, I would say the one that is slightly more versatile to be used a little bit outside DOT team will probably be Blackswan because she does have a little bit of defense breaking. Not as much as characters, for example, like Pella, for example, like Silverwolf, who offer a lot more defense breaking. I think she offers half value or something like that, Blackswan in an AoE fashion. So what does that mean is she's actually one of the favorite choice for people who are playing together with a team of Akirion. If you do not have, for example, the likes of Chow, you are playing Blackswan with Akirion. It's actually pretty decent because Blackswan offers you a little bit of defense shredding. So between the two of them, even though they play into very similar styles of team compositions of DOT, Blackswan is actually one of the characters that doesn't mind playing together with another unit like Akirion. You could play Kafka together with Akirion as well because Kafka does apply debuffs, but Blackswan's defense shredding helps you maximize both characters' damage, like Blackswan herself as well as Akirion in terms of her damage. I personally prefer playing with Kafka a bit more with Akirion because I find that lightning element, you can address content much more better. But generally, I see populations, the wider community is using more Blackswan with Akirion, and that is a sample size that is interesting to note. If you are not playing with E2 Akirion and you do not have Jiao, for example. So teams beyond DOT, I think Blackswan has a little bit of outperformance in current value. But if you're talking about DOT specific one, then it becomes a choice of, I wouldn't say chicken and egg thing. It's a matter of who do you want to pick first because both of them have their pro and cons. Blackswan is primarily in DOT teams a main DPS. You want to stack as much of her passive Arcana stacks that you can get. You probably won't hit the max at E0, S0. Only in Simulated Universe or some special game modes, you might be able to hit higher stacks. And that's when the numbers really start being very big with Blackswan. She is the best in class DOT DPS in the game that we have right now. And it's very, very strong. So if you're looking for a main damage dealer in DOT to anchor your account, Blackswan is probably the way to go, very solid for DOT teams. You get a bit of versatility because you can play with Akirion as well. Kafka, on the other hand, you switch to a flip side. The current value that Kafka offers is she is more of a supportive DOT character rather than a main DPS. She does offer some damage here and there, some shock that she provides. She also applies the pop ability in her skill that allows all the DOT on the enemy to be instantly popped for a fraction of the damage. I think it's somewhere around 75% plus minus thereabouts of the original damage that is instantly popped. So the good thing about Kafka is she is an anchor because regardless of how slow the enemy moves, regardless of whether they are broken, they are frozen, they move super slowly, they are slowed to oblivion because you are playing with, for some reason, Welt in the same team or other slow characters that slow down the enemy, Kafka hedges the issue of DOT teams because if they have tons of DOT, enemy never moves, even Blackswan's 50 Arcana stacks won't do any damage. You need to find a way to pop them. Kafka forces that pop in, so that is the difference between a character like Blackswan and Kafka. One is better suited against the true fundamental downside of DOT, whereas the other one is a very solid DOT damage dealer. In between the two, who is more important? I would say that because Kafka is a hedge, a risk factor, probably the one that is to get you started into DOT teams. Current value, Blackswan definitely offers a little bit more value in the current game state because if you are getting started, you want a very anchored DOT character to actually start pushing you through. You can get by with other sources of shock, for example, Serval has a little bit of shock. If you have Kafka's signature as well, you can just slap it on any Nihility character and they also can apply shock, which is a lot more accessible to get that shock application as well. There are other 4-star DPSs in the game, so talking about some other team compositions, you have the likes of Sampo, you have Quei Naifen, and because Arcana is a unique application, it stacks with Wind Shear from Sampo and stuff, so I find that really, really nice. So between the two of them, in terms of current value in the game state to get the best value. For the sake of versatility, you can play Blackswan into Akirion teams, and she's likely going to be like the second or third behind Jiao Qiu utility wise, arguably, of course. A lot of people are playing Blackswan, and it's a tried and tested thing. Versatility plus also a very massive damage dealer. Current value, I think Blackswan outperforms Kafka. That is current, of course. We'll talk about more of the catch in the future value section. But now, aside from that, let's talk about the next section, which is really alternatives. Because another thing that we need to consider not only is like what value do these two give your account right now, we also want to know what are the alternatives to these two particular characters in the game. If there are cheaper alternatives to get like massive amounts of DOT damage, then we might as well go with the cheaper sources, save some money, pick the other one up, which is a little bit rarer in terms of competition. Between the two of them, long story short, I think Kafka's kit is a little bit more rare because the application that she does in terms of popping that DOT and an instance, no one else does that, which fundamentally changes how DOT downside they have. If you're talking about damage amplifiers, which I would say is where Blackswan outperforms outside of DOT teams. Defense shredders, Pella outperforms. If you're talking about damage buffers because of like amplifying damage, Jiao Qiu outperforms in Akirion teams. So Blackswan is not the best in anything outside of DOT teams at the present, and she faces a lot of competition. If you have better alternatives, probably it's much better to just play those alternatives rather than Blackswan. But still, for now, she is still relatively useful outside of it. In DOT teams specifically, she is the best in slot damage dealer for DOT, especially if you don't have like eidolons of other specific characters as well. So super good. Alternatives outside of DOT, higher. In DOT, much lower. She's best in class right now. Whereas Kafka, on the other hand, if you're looking for a person that does exactly what she does, pop DOT on an instant, no other character does that in the game. She scales very well as well because it's a very unique element of characters and Kafka itself. If you're talking in the wider perspective, alternatives to maybe, now let's talk about elemental application. Because DOT, we know that there are other characters that can drop DOT. You have Sampo, you have Gui Nai Fen, you have even Luca and Serval if you just wanted Shock as well. All these characters can apply bits and pieces of DOT here and there. Kafka, of course, does it best in terms of the lightning aspect for now, but she's really unique because of that particular pop experience. Outside of that, if we talk about elemental application, lightning is actually a very common element right now in the game state. If you're talking about AoE damage dealers that just apply lightning weakness break, you have already so many. You have Serval, and since like the beginning of the game, Jingyuan also offers you that lightning AoE, and now Akirion also offers you that lightning AoE. So between the two elements, in terms of rarity, I would say that Kafka's element rarity is much more common compared to Blackswan, because Wind, there are much fewer alternatives. If you think about it, Wind DPSs in the game, maybe Blade, who is very subjective depending on how many times he gets to counter and stuff like that. So not always very stable. It's a bit of like a wild roller coaster ride. It depends on DPS. Now in the game we have Fei Xiao, who is very strong windbreaker, colorless breaker as well. Blackswan is so. Sampo, I would say, is probably like even better. So win wise, aside from Fei Xiao, the alternatives are a little bit more shaky. There aren't any clear windbreakers in the game, but I think that competition-wise, I would probably give it to Blackswan in terms of element. In terms of kit, rarity of kit, I probably will give it to Kafka, because a lot of people in the game actually do have the other stuff that you had, defense shredding, which is a little bit more common. So I'll give it a draw here in total, but we mentioned the caveats of who wins in what category as well. DOT damage dealer, of course, unrivaled for now, Blackswan, so that category she wins as well. Overall, I'll call this category a tie for alternatives. Now talking about present, very good, but that's not the only thing we need to consider, because the next thing that we need to know is actually on future value of these characters. There's no point of them being like the best in class right now, but then next patch, boom, power creep, and then they're all totally out meta. We wasted our 200 gems. It's important to talk about future value of how these characters scale, especially if you're planning to go into DOT. You want at least to play DOT for a good 6 months, 1 year to hedge any risk of your overall account. So between these two characters, the future value that I think, between logically comparing both of them, offers you more value for supportive characters in general rather than DPS characters. On the topic of power creep, generally speaking, DPS characters like Blackswan tend to be power crept a little bit faster than supportive characters in a whole nutshell of things. That's why you have characters like, people always say Harmony characters, top class, very good value, best investment value, and that is similar in that sense. Between the two of them, Kafka is more of like a supportive DOT character, and of course, Blackswan is a little bit more like a DPS DOT character, just comparing the two of them. For this case, the one that makes Kafka very supportive and very unique is her ability to pop DOT on an instance, which we talked about a little bit as well. This is not just, it's just a little bit of damage instant, but it's very fundamental because if you think about how Hoyoverse will want to box out DOT teams, one, of course, which is very difficult to counter, is effect rest of the enemy is like infinite and then you can't apply any debuffs. But that aside, because it totally obliterates the game, right? It's no fun in that. The second way they can do it is just make enemies move very slowly, or just make enemies like be very susceptible to like being broken, and then they like get action delayed and stuff. So they will never hardly take any turns, and your DOT characters just have no way to pop it, making them a little bit obsolete on some times of meta, so you have to bench them for a period of time when DOT is out of meta. Kafka hedges this entire risk because by popping on the enemy, all you just need is to let Kafka move faster and funnel your skill points into Kafka instead. Then she just keeps skill, out skill, and then you are able to counter a lot of these downsides that the game throws at you. Granted, it's just one character doing the pop, but at least it helps you hedge a bit of the low periods of DOT, especially when the circumstance changes against your favor as well. So I think that's a very, very huge thing about Kafka that makes her a very solid character for the long run. And she has tried and tested. This character has been out in CBT2 early days, super popular back then already, and she's still very popular today. She's been out for barely, I think 1 year and 5 months, 1 year, 6 months by now in the game, and still is relevant today, still has a unique place. And that long track record, I think, does show of future value as well to be able to sustain, unless they directly power creep her, which is of course uncertain at this point of time and is a risk that we still need to address. Other than that, for future value for Blackswan, one of the biggest things about Blackswan is the moment she gets stronger DPS in the DOT category, that doesn't synergize with her. So if they put in like a physical nihility character that does like single target damage, for example, like maybe a 5-star looker, for example, Blackswan, very good. But the moment you have someone that does like a bit of AoE DOT damage, especially if you're competing in the same wind shear category or something, or they offer a lot more than Blackswan in terms of not only just debuffing enemies, but maybe they help you pop enemies' weakness at the same time, or even heal or something. Those characters might offer a bit more utility. The risk for power creeping Blackswan is there, but I think they would want to explore into many other aspects before going into power creeping directly Blackswan. So longevity wise, it's still there, the future value, but it's the more vulnerable out of the two between the two of them, because it's easier to sell you a character that does more damage than to sell you a support to help your DPS do more damage. So future value, I will have to give it to Kafka. Kafka has less risk and is a much clearer runway compared to a DPS characters, which generally underperforms in future value. Even though she does defense shredding, truthfully speaking, if you take her out of DOT teams as a main DPS, she doesn't really find utility too much else other than like Akirion teams because of her minor defense shredding. But as more and more people get Jiao and more nihility supports come out, that too shall fade for Blackswan in terms of value. The next category I want to talk about is potential. This category is interesting because instead of talking about Honkai Star Rail as a game state, we want to talk about Hoyoverse and game trajectory, game development. We have been playing their games for 4 to 5 years. We've seen some trends as well, and I want to share that with you in this section. Between the two of them, the one that is like, both of them arguably are very popular, right? Both of them play into very interesting thematics. One of them is, of course, a Stellarion Hunter, which has lore backing it. So whenever there's like lore backing a character, there's more incentive for Hoyoverse to pull them back into the game, The other character here is of the Garden of Remembrance in terms of lore, and we haven't explored fully the Garden of Remembrance yet. So there's a lot more opportunities in that sense for Blackswan to still come back into the game. Maybe there's synergy with other Garden of Remembrance characters. Each of them have a tarot card or something, and when all tarot cards are put together, they combo to do some special damage. It could be an interesting angle to do things. So I would say for lore-wise and backing of them, because it's quite important, because if you are talking about a character, you introduce them in story, you have to pay money to the voice actor to come back, right? And you don't want them to be a useless character, so you rerun, no one pulls for them. It's just a cost. It's just for lore building. Hoyoverse are unlikely to do that. They tend to keep characters relevant, especially if they are like in the story a little bit too. Kafka, super popular. And I think that both of them are relatively okay in terms of the lore point of view. The one that is a bit trickier, where it sways my recommendation a bit, has to do with the banner rerun cycle. And Hoyoverse, so far in the game, has only rerun a character 3 times, and the first one to come out 3 times is Kafka. The next one is of course Topaz in the second half, but Kafka is the first character to get her 3rd rerun out of every single other character in the game, coming back even earlier than characters like Zila, characters like Jingyuan, characters like Blade, Luo Cha, Silverwolf. She is one of the fastest. Out of the 6 CBT characters, she was the latest to be released, if I'm not wrong, or second latest, and first ever to come back for a second banner. So it shows her saleability, sellability, profitability, marketability, whatever that is. But Kafka is very, very interesting in that sense. Coming back for a second rerun means that the 3rd banner, 3rd time she comes around, which is the 4th banner that she appears, might be a lot further away than expected. These 2 characters, Blackswan of course has came back for her. This is her first rerun, Blackswan. Both of these characters haven't appeared for 6 or 7 months, thereabouts, each of them. Roughly coming around the same time when Blackswan first came out and Kafka's first rerun. But now, 7 and 6 months later, these 2 are coming back again. We don't know when Kafka is going to come back for her 4th banner. I think the chances are very slim. But now that we know that a 3rd banner is a possibility, Blackswan will likely come back sooner or later. We know that for a fact. But yet, the 4th banner is uncertain. So because of that, for potential-wise, looking at Hoyoverse's strategy, I don't know whether 1 year later Kafka will come back, but I do know I'm more confident right now because of the trend that we see. A 3rd banner for Blackswan eventually will happen, and it will likely happen sooner than Kafka's 4th banner. So for that reason, in potential category, I'll rate Kafka as a higher priority. She's probably the better investment, especially if you're looking to pick someone up right now, just because of the banner trends that we have in the broader game state. I don't want you to miss a character out and never get to pull them, because these 2 are roughly, in my opinion, roughly even, depending on the needs that you might need them for. We'll talk about the needs, what are the specific needs in this section here, which is the free-to-play kit. Between the 2 of them, they have decent free-to-play options. You have free-to-play options for both like damage-dealing nihility characters. You have free-to-play options for supportive nihility characters, regardless of whatever you're using. You have even the Kafka's like 4-star one, which I think is like free-to-play. So very good amounts of support for DOT light cones for 4 stars. The question is, do you want them to do a little bit more? If you want them to do more than that, because it's very different when you're talking about E0, S0 versus E0 and their signature or multiple copies of their gear. So let's scale it up a little bit. Base copy E0, S0, the damage dealer generally underperforms a supportive character who is not meant for like majority damage. You can get majority of Kafka's kit by having built for speed, by applying the pop damage, because the pop damage is on the amount that they will have taken anyway. So you can get a lot of the value out of Kafka as a free-to-play player, E0, S0, just using some 4-star, not too bad already. But a DPS character loses a lot of value if you do not have their signature light cone and you're running with a 4-star. You can actually see the drastic difference in terms of DPS. So baseline E0, S0, probably Blackswan is going to be the one that is more expensive to build. I will favor Kafka a little bit more. As the game goes by, E1, E2, E1 and E2 Kafka actually offers a lot of support potential to buff DOT damage, amplifying enemies' DOT taken as well. So Kafka actually goes a longer way if you're planning to invest in a character. Whereas Blackswan, yes, you reduce some rest in E1 and you increase the rate of getting stacks at E2 and stuff like that. But at the same time, you're just doubling down on a DPS. So my recommendation, if you're talking about base E0, S0, Kafka probably wins for the sake of being a support, cheaper to build, don't really need too much investment in terms of expensive stuff, and scale to E2 probably will last you even a longer period of time. E2 Blackswan is strong, but might be, you don't fundamentally change anything because you will likely still get power crack if a very strong DPS come out in future, unless you can of course play them all together, which is very, very important. And at this point of time, I want to talk about the last thing is Nihility characters in general, and this is where I share you my biased thoughts. Nihility characters, unlike a lot of the other characters in the game, are actually not as subjected to power creep compared to a lot of the other units. Whenever we talk about better investment video, I'm always choosing one between the two. But in this video, my honest recommendation is if you can afford it, you will eventually want to go for both. And Nihility teams are one of the most expensive teams, debuff teams, DOT teams, because you need all four to be equally strong. So if you have Blackswan, you have Kafka, you have Jiao, E2 for example, and maybe a future Nihility healer that comes out that like helps or a buffer or something, you have like 4 characters, all good. They don't power creep each other and you can use all of them harmoniously together. They will all be very strong. If I were to force myself to like choose between like both of them are like your wives, right? You can, in Honkai style, you can marry more than one wife. So my decision factor is helping you choose who's your first wife and second wife. Ultimately, you need both of them. My recommendation and my personal bias is I'll take Kafka for the long run effect. I think Kafka just hedges a lot more risk much better, and also for the fact that I don't know when she's coming back for a 4th rerun. Blackswan, on the other hand, game state currently wise, she's probably the more flashy one, more better to have right now in the game state. But at the same time, I know she's coming back for a 3rd banner. She is definitely very strong. If I have to make a choice right now, it's more logical to go for Kafka, who I don't know when it's coming back. Blackswan, I'll pick her up when she comes back, or even when she comes back in the future, maybe there's another unit already, then I'll just pick up the better DPS. It at least reduces the risk, and that will be my honest recommendation. If you guys found this video helpful, the question would then be at this point, would you even want to get into DOT at all? Check out this video here where we cover DOT and also some community thoughts that I think might be very interesting for you. Like, comment, subscribe, share with anyone who are considering DOT in this patch that you know, and thank you guys again so much for watching. See you next video.